Good afternoon. I'm Randy Horton, Chief Solutions Officer of Orthogonal. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar, taking some time out of your very busy schedules to invest in a session on the topic of SaMD development and the use of AI tooling. As many of you know, Orthogonal does these kinds of webinars about once a month, and our goal is to bring together experts from the industry, from medical device manufacturers or other firms engaged in this space, looking to really share best practices and state-of-the-art ideas, cutting-edge things that we can help us all accelerate our development of software as a medical device. We've got a terrific lineup today, as you'll see. A couple quick things before we get going. First, we really value your feedback, and by feedback, I mean brutally candid feedback, not like, oh, that was a nice webinar feedback. It's the single most important data source we have for making each webinar, trying to make it better than the last one. Lessons learned on what we could do better, and also ideas for what kinds of things you are interested in as an audience going forward. We may contact you directly. If we send you an email or a phone call even, do me a favor, just answer or reply to us. Tell us what your thoughts are. We'd really welcome it. Very briefly, I didn't used to say this in webinars, but I was told it wasn't obvious, which is that who Orthogonal is and what we do, and I'll also give our partners on the call a chance to do that. But Orthogonal is in the business of improving patient outcomes by accelerating the development of software as a medical device, connected device systems, and digital therapeutics. You can think of it as sort of a contract manufacturer for medical device software, all the software that's part of a device but not physically inside a device. So cloud backends, AI, ML integration, mobile apps, Bluetooth controllers for physical devices, but not firmware and embedded. And our reason for being is to accelerate the development of SaMD by 2, 3x and even more by taking the latest and greatest tools and techniques used in software engineering and product management, things that really come out of sort of the tech world in the Bay Area, as opposed to out of healthcare or med tech, and applying them to med tech in a way that really respects and values medtech's historic focus on safety and effectiveness, and looking at how can we use these modern ways of building software to not just build better devices faster than before, but actually fundamentally raise the bar on safety and effectiveness as we go. So if you have questions about that, we're always happy to talk about that later. And I will ask our partners from SoftComply introduce themselves in a minute to just explain a little bit about what it is that they do. So I'll introduce our panelists for today. First, I say the goal here is to really have a timely discussion. We're going to try and pack several hours of content into less than an hour, and for you to walk away with some very actionable gold nuggets. There's theory in here, but we're really also trying to give you practical things you can turn around and use for work today and tomorrow. The first 50 minutes of this, we will cover the content we have promised in this discussion. You'll get what you've coming for, and if you got to hop at the end of lunch, or I suppose if you're in Europe, you got to hop for dinner, we'll get you what you wanted. But we could stay on a while longer and answer questions. And frequently we find we have about 40% of the people who are asking questions a good 30 minutes after these end. So we are happy to keep answering questions. By the way, if you submitted questions ahead of time, we are going to try and address those during these as well. And if we don't, feel free to let us know. So with that, first, let me ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Marian.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. And Randy, thanks for inviting us to join the webinar. We are from SoftComply, me and Matteo. We are the co-founders, and SoftComply is a software company in Europe that helps medical device developers in compliance on a Atlassian platform. So we want to integrate and automate your risk and document management on Jira and Confluence to get you going faster and get you ready for audits quicker and more affordable, probably. So I'm Marian. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of SoftComply, and I'm most excited to talk about AI tooling in software development and how you should, what you should consider when you adopt those tools. Thanks, Randy.
Right, Matteo.
Hello, I am the CRO of SoftComply. I am responsible in SoftComply for everything that is related to compliance to medical device standards, the regulation, or standards in general. I have about 18 years experience in working in the medical device environment, did a lot of tool validation, tool assessment, and recently been exposed to AI in all sorts of shapes and form in the device or to support the development of the device.
Great. And Bernhard, my friend and colleague, I just realized of 25 years.
Oh my, yes. Um, yeah, so I'm Bernhard Kappa. I'm the founder and CEO of Orthogonal. Obviously, we are knee deep in developing AI models as part of medical devices, in terms of also the AI factory, the processes and the validation around how you develop those things, and then also tooling within our SDLC, and then also for our customers, let's call it SDLC or product lifecycle processes. And this is a fast-moving area where I think we've developed some techniques and approaches to kind of incrementally making things better. So happy to share some of that and talk through what we've been able to do now, how we think about it, and answer some of the questions that came in beforehand.
Excellent. Excellent. So I will say, if you stick around to the end, we have a tradition on our webinar starting this year. We actually use an AI service to write a theme song for every webinar. They're really bad, but each one's in a new musical genre. This one's a California-style 1960s surf rock song about this webinar. So you're welcome to listen at the end. And we're thinking of putting out a playlist of really, really bad AI music, AI webinar music, the worst of AI webinar music. At the end of this year. It'll be our holiday gift that you don't want us to mail to you. So I have to say, we talk about how quickly these things are evolving and, how much AI is changing the game. I was just at an NVIDIA conference 2 weeks ago, and that was all the buzz. But it's at a certain point, it gets to be humorous, right? I mean, I'm kind of reminded of this Saturday Night Live sketch maybe 15, 20 years ago, where Fred Armisen plays Steve Jobs introducing the newest iPod. It's the iPod Mini, and holds 10,000 songs and 10,000 videos. And then they say, well, that's amazing. He goes, yes, but it's obsolete. And he introduces the iPod Pequeño, which is about this big, it's like the size of an old SD card, and says, this one holds 1 million songs and 10 million movies. And they're like, that's amazing. He goes, yes, but it's obsolete. And then he introduces the iPod Inviso, which you can't even see. It holds every picture ever taken, every song ever written, all of those things. And I kind of feel like that's where we're at with these AI things. By the time we're done with the discussion, it's obsolete. So let's talk about some principles first. Why are we having this conversation about using AI tooling to build medical device software?
I mean, in general, right, there's AI outside of the medical device space, and frankly, in software development and all kinds of things, is proving to be extremely valuable and useful in being able to do things faster and with greater accuracy, right? I think that's the case. And so the promise there is that we can do things 2x, 3x, however many x over time, and with higher quality, right? That's the promise. And that's why everyone's interested. No different than in any other industry. While there's a lot of AI hype, there's also a lot of AI reality and value that we are seeing, and we're going to expect to see more value over time. So get in the game or stay or get left behind. I think that's the nature of the beast.
So let me ask a couple of clarifying questions. First of all, this webinar is about the use of AI tools to build software for medical devices. It is not about deploying AI algorithms inside a medical device, for instance, for clinical decision support or image recognition or treatment optimization or something. Why are those different subjects?
Well, one, I think the requirements are different for that. Typically the patient risk around those things is different, and certainly there are different quality and regulatory requirements around that, right? So if you have an algorithm in a device and it is device functionality, then you're going to have to, do a 510K or a CE mark for that, right? And so there's specific things there around clinical evidence, et cetera, that you need to provide for things that are as part of a medical device. Now, if you're using something as a tool in order to create a medical device, there's a different related paradigm around software validation and around tools validation that you use. So both of them deal with risk assessment, risk management, but one of them is something that you have to submit and might need to have clinical evidence for. The other is you don't have to do that. You have to have the evidence of that in your quality management system, but it's typically a lighter burden and not something that you have to submit as part of your regulatory file.
Do we need one more clarifying question? I'll throw this out to maybe Matteo. I'll start with you. Do we need to differentiate in this conversation at each point whether we're talking what kind of AI are we talking about? Are we talking about sort of generative AI with LLMs, which is sort of the latest thing? Old school AI, I guess, which would now be machine learning, or really old school or OG AI, which would be sort of pre-machine learning, or is it one and the same for this conversation?
Oh, that's a difficult question. So I would differentiate based on how open, and we kind of had a question already related to that, how open and how knowledgeable you can be on what this tool does. The latest AI, they are trained, you talk to them and they give you an answer, okay, talking about LLMs. The old one, and we're talking, if you think about what the AI Act in Europe says, that even Bayesian inference is considered some sort of AI, well, that is a pretty well-known type of statistical methods. So you have a very good insight. So, but all of these are considered, at least for the AI Act, AI. What the differentiation is in my mind is, again, the level of knowledge, how much you know about how this AI works. So if you're talking about the latest AI, you know very little. If you're going back 10, 15, 20 years, you probably have a good idea of how these things may work.
I think.
Yeah, if I may add, maybe to that, I mean, when we talk about the question that we just now got, is about the transparency, right? How much does the AI tool developer share with you as a customer? Do you know if the model is frozen when you validate it? So different things that the tool developer now also needs to consider, thinking of the regulated industry customers that they have, right? So a lot of times, I don't think that the tool developers, AI tool developers, have actually considered what the end customer needs to do with that tool, or they are not really ready. They were like, oh my God, this tool will be so popular because it has AI in it, and it will make the life of the customer so much easier, but never really gave the thought into the fact that, okay, they need to validate it, they need to freeze the model, and see how accurate the data or the model really is. So there's a lot, I think, that we need to do still. So when you say, what is the difference between AI-enabled medical devices? There's a lot of standards, requirements, and guidance for the developers, but there is relatively little today still for the AI tool developers, thinking that, okay, this tool will be used by regulated industry customers, which I think is very, like you said, standards normally always come later than when we see that, okay, we need something, people need something, some requirements, some guidance. So we are, like the example that you brought, we are always a bit behind, but at least we're trying to get there. And I think this webinar was an example of starting to talk about AI-enabled medical devices when we realized actually the question is also about those tools that we use ourselves in the software development of these medical devices. So, yeah.
So, can you go into that? Sorry, go ahead, Banner.
Yeah. So if we look at the questions around the nature of the AI, right? If we look at it at the beginning, we had really bounded problems. The more we get into things like large language models and generative AI, well, you can ask ChatGPT anything, right? And if you just have ChatGPT in your medical device, you know, the bounds of that are very broad. There's no way to control what the inputs and outputs are if you just have the general interface. What we have seen as we go into using these, frankly, revolutionary models, obviously they've it's been an evolution, but to the point where now they are extremely useful in other ways than they were before, because we have trained these things, and now we can say, okay, we're going to bound the questions that we are asking. We're going to do further training of these models so that we're if you're asking questions on software architecture and you want to enforce a particular style of programming, for example, right? You want cloud native versus kind of old school kind of object oriented programming stuff that like worked in the pre-cloud days, right? You can specify and you can enforce some of that in the tools, even though there's an LLM underneath and there are other things like that you can bound that, and you can say, look, if we're not using those things, then the tool as it's reviewing will tell you, hey, these are the best practices that we are enforcing within the company. So it's a question of your being able to tune those types of things and to be able to bound that. So more powerful, but you still have to bound. Otherwise, you can't do risk management without bounding, right?
I have a question to you, Bernhard. Like in theory, the idea is that when you're using an AI tool, you have to document the intended use of that AI tool in your development. But how much have you experienced that an audit actually asks for this documentation? Like when an audit comes of the medical device, CE marking, FDA audit, do they ask the developer about, show me the documentation about what you did in terms of validating that the AI tool does what it's intending to do and it's reliable, it's accurate, in the limits that you see it has to work?
I mean, I don't think at this point, right, about as much as they do, they ask you about your tool's validation in general, right? I think the question, so within that, then one, are they going to ask you about your tool's validation? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It all depends, right? And then within that, are they going to focus on AI tools? I expect there's a lag to that. We're going to get that more as we go along, and frankly, as we get more reliance on AI tooling, and even more important, as people misuse AI tooling, at which point they're going to be like, okay, how are you managing this, right?
Right.
I think it's similar to kind of the use of cloud computing, right?
Exactly.
The FDA, for example, does not have guidance on that. We are working on guidance for the use of cloud computing, but we haven't seen a ton of scrutiny on how are you using the cloud. You're building things on top of the cloud from auditors, because I think in many cases they don't know how to evaluate that. So they don't look very good if they don't know how.
Yeah, in Europe, right? We know that some notified bodies, we do know which notified bodies will check that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think the next day it will change.
So
That's
basically,
right. There are
it means
some auditors that care, some that don't.
Exactly.
Don't mention AI during the audit, and they will not ask the question.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't mean you don't have to
Yes.
deal with it, but really, I think there's two parts to the kind of to what you have to do that's the same versus what's different, right? The thing you have to do that's the same, the whole concept of tools validation, where you're looking and evaluating the tools and you are determining what are the risks of not being able to detect that the tool is failing, or of the tool failing, and then do appropriate risk management. In some cases, whether this is an AI tool or not, you can say, you know what, I can do inspection, I can do a number of things. I don't have to validate this tool. That applies to some AI tooling as well as non-AI tooling. Others like, no, we do need to do that validation. The next piece of that then is, okay, is this a fixed tool, and is it deterministic or is it not? And what are the acceptable risks within that, and how do we monitor that, right? That is the same paradigm as we now are going to have for the cloud in TIR 115, right?
So we had a lot of requests ahead of this for very specific examples in the discussion. So why don't I recap 2 general points I think have been made? We can agree on those and then move forward. One is that I think there's unanimous consensus that the companies creating all these brilliant tools are not going to step up and help us do the validation job we need done in medtech. And generally speaking, and I don't say this is a knock to them, this is our job, but when we ask them, explain the kinds of things we're looking at, the answer is usually like, well, that sounds stupid. Why would you want to do that? Or that sounds like a you problem and not a me problem, as my kids would say. So
that is very similar to cloud validation, right? Cloud
yeah,
validation.
yeah. So let's start with the assumption we're on our own here, okay? And we as med tech or safety critical industries are going to have to answer this one, and the tools are not going to bend for us. The second one is that the point about regulatory oversight is inconsistent, both in in terms of the regulations, but also in terms of the knowledge the person you're sitting across from. But as Wayne Gretzky famously said about playing hockey, I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where the puck is going. So let's go out on the assumption that the puck is going somewhere where there's going to be a higher bar consistently that we need to assume we're going to do. And even if it's not, we need to do it anyway and have the higher bar just because we need to have confidence in our own medical devices because our family members might use them. So given all of that, let's take a more specific example. So let's take maybe sort of the simplest one to do here is something like GitHub Copilot or CodeRabbit, but a tool that as you're writing code, helps you write more code fast and goes out and looks at the universe of code that's been written and suggests things to, it's sort of an autocomplete or an autocomplete plus kind of a thing. So maybe if one of you could describe what coding is like for one of those tools, if anybody on the webinar is not interested. And let's kind of walk through the life cycle of how do you select these tools, how do you do risk management, how do you validate them, yada, yada. So maybe could one of you explain what it's like to actually use one of these tools at a high level?
I can, okay, background. I'm not a software person. I'm not a software developer. My background is mechanical engineering, but I like typing stuff and telling my computer what to do. So I did a little bit of coding, and internally we started using Cursor. And you realize, even from my lack of knowledge, you realize pretty quickly what this thing can do and what this thing cannot do. And you realize pretty quickly how good and what type of questions and what type of task you can ask this AI to do. And this applies not just for coding, but for everything. So probably people have heard about these prompt engineers or prompt engineerings that are people that know how to interface to an AI to get the best out of it. So my experience was that it is still useful for many things, but with a significant amount of human oversight. You just tell Cursor to do something, it will create beautiful code that does not work. That is pretty much it. So you need really to slow down and go more into the task details and try to give the very precise information, resources where this AI should focus on instead of just going everywhere. Because even these tools are like Cursor, it works using like Claude and many other type of models, and it just uses the one that you select or the one that it believes is best. But these are still generic tools that we all know that these tools are prone to, if you don't want to say hallucination, but at least they try to please you. So many times I had this conversation with the cursor, say, oh, what do you think about that? Oh, yes, great idea, let's do it. And then it doesn't work. So I don't really need somebody condescendent that makes me feel good and then it doesn't work. I need something more critical. So this was my experience. In terms of the selection, how we got there, it was purely from a technical standpoint. It was our CTO and our developers who decided that this was the tool that they wanted to use, because in fairness, it works really well. But again, we didn't even step into the thinking of how to validate this tool, because it's still based on a lot of human oversight and testing. And this is something that I definitely would like to cover later, and it is part of the question that we received about validation. What do you do? It's, you know, the general principle of validation for anything is verify or validate. So these things gives you an input based on output based on certain inputs. What do? Do you just trust it blindly? Well, then your validation should be pretty heavy. Do you have a lot of other gates that where there are people who review the output that gets tested, and so forth? Well, then the validation effort is probably significantly reduced. Going back a decade or even more, that the FDA said, well, you know what, compilers, you don't really need to spend a lot of time on validation because they do a lot of magic behind the scenes, but you know, you eventually are going to test the output of these compilers. That doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything, but there is a lot of post the verification after the tool has done its job.
And to continue from there, what Matteo said is that the EU AI Act at least says that the higher the risk of the AI tool, the more human oversight there should be in place, right? And in our tool, when we talk about code generating and cursor, there is always the developer who reviews it and says, okay, this makes sense, this does not make any sense at all. But what if you have a tool that generates requirements, tests, or risks for your medical device? And I mean, these are all high risk, and there you need to have a human oversight, and that's much more dangerous than code generator.
Yeah, again, sorry if I step in again, but my idea here is just don't trust it. Like it's a tool that does things very quickly and it provides a lot of information, but you need total oversight. Like you can't just, yes, great, if you generate the risk, it can generate requirement, it can generate, eventually start generating real documentation, but then you really need to read through it and make sure it makes sense.
But it's like any tool, right? Before you take a tool, you want to try it out. You probably try it out in a sandbox environment just to make sure. You start small, you start with one project, you want to make sure that it is, you know, accurate, it doesn't make too many mistakes. Bernard, can you tell me how I mean, you probably used a few of those tools. Like, how did you start? How did you choose, like, from between 3 tools that, okay, this one is the better one because it's more accurate or more predictable, or you can control it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as with any kind of tool or software that you're using, part of it is, you know, is obviously fit for purpose, but then similarly with programming language, here's this obscure programming language that no one knows how to use, and it's a few people using, versus, wow, this is in broad use and continually evolving. Those are other things that you look at it. You know, chances are, if it's in broad use it continues to evolve, people have run into problems and solved those problems, and the tool gets better, right? So that's the thing you have to sort of take into consideration. Cursor's great. We use GitHub Copilot. I think I'd have to ask exactly how our CTO went into evaluating that versus the others. But some of this is like what fits into your environment and how you do things, et cetera. And then the general tool evaluation types of things. IP considerations are another part of that you really want to take into consideration. Is how protected is your data, and how much can you actually you know, restrict some of these things, right? I would say that a tool like Cursor or Copilot is is one of the easier ones to implement. That's really where we started on this. And that's because, one, we have good, strong, experienced developers who this tool makes better, right? We don't have people like, they sort of know what they're doing. And, there have been studies that if you have people who are experienced and good, it can make them dramatically more productive. On the other side, if they are not, it can make them less productive than they would have been otherwise, right? But the other part of it is, again, as Matteo had said, if you have checks and you have things around this to sort of bound the risks of the tooling, it's so much easier to do something where the AI tooling is not just checking, it's actually creating something. If we think about our software development process, right? We already do test-driven development, behavior-driven design. We test everything. Everything goes into a CI/CD environment. We have verification protocols that are built up out of those things. We have at code check-in, we have design reviews by individuals. So before the code actually, gets put on the main branch, we already have tooling that is looking for doing static code analysis, dynamic code analysis. There's already a ton of rigor and tooling around it. So if there is already that, then it's much easier to say, oh, well, here is how we catch the risks if this happens, if that happens, etc. That's why you can do something with Copilot or Cursor that is relatively sophisticated and generative because you have all of that around it. The further you are from that, the more, the less structure or good data or tooling you have around it to manage the risk, the harder it is to do the most advanced kind of stuff, right? And you need different paradigms for that, right? In this case, the paradigm is potentially, the tool directed by the person does the work, and then either robot or person verifies that it works and is good, right? The other paradigms as you move out from there are more, well, the person does and the robot checks, or the person does and the AI tool checks for things, etc. That's a lot of the things that we're doing further out are less the robot's doing everything or the AI tooling is doing everything. It's more pointing out where humans are maybe missing something, right?
No. So can we drill in on that point? There was an interesting one we had, but I think you've teed it up well, which is this whole thing of, so who's checking the work of the AI? Is it a human in the loop, like a human, just there's an average human who's really good at every instance at every moment in doing it, or does the robot check it? In which case, how do you know that you're not just having dumb check dumber?
I mean, it depends, right? If you have very good structured data and you know what you want, again, in that example, we do have, robots checking the code, right? We have unit tests, we have functional tests. Those are in your CI/CD environment. Those are things obviously you want to have as validated tools that your CI/CD environment works, and you have good unit testing. You have those types of things. In that case, it's the robots, but it's also people. The answer is both in that particular case, right?
So
I think there are other areas where again, software development is pretty rigorous and pretty well automated already, right? You get tons of value out of doing lots of automation. We've done this. So AI is easy to fit into that. It's a lot harder to fit into areas where do you know what good is, right? If you're training something on bad examples or bad data, right? If you don't know what good grammar is, right, or good spelling, and you're just sort of saying, let's go look at a bunch of fourth graders spelling, this is how we're training our our models on how to do this. Well, you're not going to get what you want out of that unless you want to simulate, fourth graders spelling, right? So the question is, how good is the data? And maybe we can come back to that, or I could go into this now. One of the things I know, some of our customers who have lots and lots of quality data, right, about not necessarily the internals, how the software works, the requirements, etc., but more everything else around the QMS. And they've tried to do model training around that and sort of build models so that they can automate more of that. A lot of what they've found is because those things were all done by humans in a way that was not as structured as, say, software and data is, that it's really bad. And there's a lot of mistakes. And they actually have to sort of fix that in order to train AI on it to recognize what good is, so they can say, no, this is not good. Now here is good. So that's part of it, right? The less automation there has been around something, the more it's just been a purely human endeavor, the more likely you are to have, problems with what's good, what's bad. Well, we did this way before. Yeah, but that was problematic.
Yeah, I think to add to this, I mean, when we have these questions about, how do I know if this tool is good or the supplier is not open enough? I mean, everybody is saying that you need to validate that tool, and it's similar to cloud that is always changing. How do you, if you can freeze that model, then it's no problem. You validate it, but even then, it's much more demanding than cloud tool validation. In cloud tool validation, you either pass the test, you don't pass the test. With AI, you have boundaries. You set boundaries of how accurate, precise, or correct it is. And if it's not performing that well, then you say, okay, this tool is definitely not going to work for me, especially for the high risk tools. And in EU AI Act, I think that's exactly what they do. They say that your model has to be frozen, and then you have to see that you always consistently get the same output from the same input, right? But this is, I think this is much more demanding from a device developer or anybody who adopts these tools, because in our experience, some companies even go like, okay, cloud tool validation is already a nightmare. Like, how am I going to do the AI tool validation now? And I think to answer one of the questions that we had, I think one of the things that people now know to ask is about this data handling statements of the AI tool developers, saying that my data should not be used for training. This is something that I think is already a commonplace. But to be able to say, okay, I need the transparency of what version of the model I have so that I can validate. And if you have changes in the model, you will tell us so that we can validate again. And this is something that I think is has to become part of the AI tool developers kind of mainstream understanding as well, that they need to be open. Like Randy, you said that, okay, they're not going to do it for medical device developers and regulated industries because we asked them. But I do think that there is a market big enough, and probably a lot of higher risk AI tools will have to have this transparency.
Maybe I would say there, you kind of, I think our lessons learned from how to deal with the cloud, I think also apply here, right? I know when we were starting to work on the guidance for use of cloud computing for medical devices, right? We had mostly medical device companies and the FDA as part of that working group. And then at some point we brought the cloud providers, we brought, Amazon and Google and Microsoft. And we're all proud of the paradigm we had developed, which was, hey, just tell us the changes so we can validate that and then we'll be good. And they said, we can give you that, but I don't know that that's really what you want, right? And then they explained that the number of changes that are actually happening underneath are thousands a day to thousands an hour. And if we can give you all of those changes and you can go through and evaluate and do that as a human being, and you're always going to be way, way behind, right? So that paradigm doesn't work under those circumstances. And I think the same thing is the case in AI, except sort of, dialed up a bit more than just in the cloud, right? So you need to have a different paradigm that treats it maybe more of a black box, but has and where you understand what the potential failure modes are of something, and then how how to make sure that those are transparent, or you can tell what those are, and at the same time you are treating the cloud provider as a vendor, and you have appropriate evaluation. Is this a good vendor? Do they have good practices, etc.? The same thing for AI tooling, etc. You may not be able to control everything they do, but you can make good selections and ask for better transparency on it.
Yeah, and this is really a new paradigm in med tech. In fact, when we kind of came to these conclusions on the cloud TIR, about 6 months later, I realized how subversive they were and got a little afraid that we were going to be run out of the industry, because nobody had really, as far as I understand it, ever stood up in the industry and said, we're entering an era where we fundamentally don't control and can't understand the technologies that are going to underpin our medical devices. And that's okay. We're allowed to do that. We're allowed to actually admit it out loud, whereas we might have suspected it before, but we can admit it out loud because the pace of change in the cloud or in AI is so great, you can't gloss over it. This is not like, Microsoft had a new release of Windows, and so everybody who's got a Windows machine talking to a spirometer or a piece of lab equipment is going to have to update it, and that could change the app. It's way more than that. But what we now need to do is say, okay, so we don't have control. Where is it that we can do really good automation and just find issues quickly when they do emerge, understanding that they will be real issues in production, right? These will be hitting the human body. And where's that not acceptable? And we're just going to have to pull back and not use these tools because it's not an option to say we should catch a problem within an hour of it happening, right? We're confident we can catch it within an hour.
I would say because the risk for tools is lower, you have a lot more that you can do with tools than with AI in the medical device, right? We're a little bit further along there, and it'll probably lead what is in the medical device, right? If you, for example, let's say you have a digital therapeutic that is doing some kind of cognitive behavioral therapy, and you could use an AI agent as part of that sort of takes feedback and gets inputs and tailors something to an individual person. Getting that thing through the FDA and proving both effectiveness and kind of safety is a lot harder than using a code generation tool within your software development process. It just is, right? It's real time, and the amount of data that you need to use because of higher risks, etc. Same thing if you were using an AI agent to real time, and change the setting on a defibrillator or on a bolus for an insulin pump or something like that. Guess what? That might be a little bit higher threshold, and we're probably going to lag what we might be able to do in some other industries or lower risk things within the device. So tools is a lot easier in that regard.
So let's talk a little bit about, because we've had a bunch of questions about this and we've hinted at this, which is one of the interesting parts about AI is how quickly the underlying technology itself changes. That you can validate something, but it's not a one and done, or it's not an annual exercise. And without going into too much detail, there's a number of levels this lives at, right? You can say, well, we validated Claude 4.62 professional version or whatever. You can say, okay, but now we're still on 4.62 professional, but there's all kind of new content that's come into it since the last time you used it. So that's changing. Then you've got third-party tool integrations, right, that work with these things that are dynamic. So the bottom line is, though, because of this, it's never exactly the same tool as the last time you used it. I don't even know in LM if you can turn off learning of new content or not. So how do you take that into account when you're validating a tool? Say, okay, we're comfortable with it. 5 minutes later, okay, we're still comfortable with it.
Again, it's how are you using the tool, right? Is the tool something that is, again, that the code generation tool, again, we've already described all of the bounds around that and the risks. If it changes and something breaks in that, we're going to catch it, right? Because we have all of this around it. And so I feel pretty comfortable about that tooling in use in the core as a doing the work as opposed to just checking the work. For things where it's checking the work, again, it's lower risk, right? It's possible that you may have something in your let's say you have something that's checking for regulatory compliance. Well, if you have a person that's checking for regulatory compliance, right, they're going to be looking at things, but maybe they missed something, and a tool says, "Hey, you missed X, Y, and Z," right? If you have a person who knows what they're doing, they're like, "Oh yeah, thanks, I missed that," or "I don't know that I agree with that. Let me go investigate that," right? That's a different paradigm. It's also not a real-time type of thing. I would not say don't have a person go check for regulatory compliance and just have the robot do it. I don't think we're there on that type of thing, right? There's a lot of room for interpretation and other things there where I don't think we can do that quite yet. So I think that's, again, look at what it is you're doing and what the nature of the risk bounds you can have around it, how much risk is there in it, and how you're using it, right? There's tremendous value in tools that don't just do something, but do checking and other things like that. Design it into your process. And then start there, and then maybe as you get more comfortable or the tools get better and you really understand how to bound those risks, either through people, other tools, process, etc., then you can have that tool do more work over time, right?
I think if I may add to this, I was just checking like what's different standards and EU Act, for example, and 42001. What do they suggest as as an end user of AI tools for development? What it is that they should do and how they should kind of document things to be ready for an auditor who might know that there is an AI tool used in the development and wants to get some idea of how they were tested. So first of all, they recommend to write down the intended use of how this AI tool is very similar to what the first part is very similar to cloud tool validation. How are you using this AI tool? The risk assessment of the tool, how did you do that? The validation plan and results, similar to cloud, but difference is that, like we said, pass and fail is now different. Of like, if it's less accurate than 80%, we'll ditch that tool. We can't use that anymore. They recommend you have the human oversight so that there is a human in the loop. Not always it's hard to say, like you said, Bernard, like how do you make sure that you can control the whole thing? And I think the one thing that is the very difficult thing is this change logs and audit log. Like if you have a human in the loop, and let's say that it generates risks, the AI tool generates risks for your device, that everything you accepted and everything you rejected for some reason, it is completely logged in the system so that the auditor can keep track of that. I'm not sure if the tools are doing it at the moment, that you have the full audit log of which human accepted which suggestion and which suggestions were rejected. Have you seen this type of audit logs? Any one of you?
No, I have not. And that's,
Yeah,
I
me
think that's
neither.
actually a very good point. Matteo, have you seen anything there?
Oh, absolutely not. And actually, but here we're already talking about a relatively specific type of implementation of an AI that does, like, it creates a risk very specifically, and then there is an interface where somebody can accept or reject. So this is something that I think it just goes beyond the simple use of a generic AI. This is something that somebody has to implement in a tool.
Yeah, it's
And
like, let's say that you
yeah.
have a list of requirements and it takes this document and generates the risks for you.
Yeah,
But I wouldn't really, again, I will go like, sorry, it was Randy or Bernard that was saying something.
I think that was Randy.
Randy,
Randy, go ahead, because I'm going to go into a spiel then in a second.
I think, actually it's an interesting question you all are raising, because there's a question of sort of the last mile implementation of these things. What happens when you actually do the tool? And part of this, and again, I don't say this as a knock on anybody. I think this is just part of a process of us trying to learn, from a fire hose. But I was talking to somebody who I think has a very, very sophisticated view of AI tools validation across many companies in med tech. And they were saying, well, yeah, what you don't do is you don't just turn on these tools and use them for everything. You sort of, essentially, it's like one indication at a time, one use case at a time they validate. I said, okay, that's good. I said, do you know if the actual tools prevent the programmers in any of these companies from doing more than that? Like, are those a couple of tools they can use, but the open-ended thing is there, and what they're actually doing is using it for everything? And he said to me, it's a good question. I have no idea what's actually happening on the ground at these companies. I know what we're saying in quality. I don't know if it's being enforced at a tooling level. So I think there's a lot of these last mile problems that we're going to have to be sorting through.
And I think there's an important thing here. If you think about sort of the value of AI tooling, or it is, I think, greater if you have a greater degree of digitization and automation in the first place, right? So if we think about it, obviously, SoftComply's tooling is built on top of Confluence, or integrates in with that, also integrates in with X-Ray, and we think of all of the tooling that we have, where we're saying, okay, architecture as code, test automation, requirements generation, all the way through, right? If we already have really good tooling and automation around those things, then plugging AI into that is a lot easier than if we have a little AI thing over here, and it's sort of going at, well, not really data that we have, and we don't really have access to all this data, et cetera. Then it's just sort of this isolated thing that is maybe helpful to an individual, but isn't, you don't have a whole lot to be able to say, oh, this is here, things like logging, things like bounding, all of those types of things you have when you have a much more end-to-end automation within the SDLC and digitization within your product development lifecycle. That's when you get greater benefits out of that, and being able to both, just apply it very quickly and learn from that application as well, right? And I think that's how we're sort of moving from the core out as we're doing this, doing our development, right? There's some, step one is really, what does your process look like? Do you have metrics for that process? If you're going to add a new tool, whether that is an AI tool or not an AI tool, how is that tool going to improve your metrics? What is it going to do for you? And AI fits in that way as well. Any kind of AI tooling that you are putting in there, you have to understand, it sounds like it might, but maybe you should run a test. That's what we do with new tooling, is we'll say, okay, let's test it on for some portion, not on every project, not on everything that we're doing, but let's test it and see, does it hold promise to improve the metrics? Same goes for for any tooling. It also goes for AI tooling, and then you just you're trying to incrementally get faster, right? We're trying to get from 2x where we were 2 years ago to 3 to 4x where we are now over the next 4 years. That's an incremental process. It's not, there is the perfect tool now. It's not the case. It's just, trying to both run experiments and then take the positive results of experiments and fold them into your full process for everyone, so that you can actually make a difference, right?
I have a question, Bernard, to you. I read somewhere that when you're selecting an AI tool, that you should treat the AI tool developer as you do vendor risk assessment, like the similar way as you have your other vendors. Have you seen this type of AI tool assessments already, like the similar ones that you have with vendors?
We certainly are doing that ourselves, and I think with some of our customers, I will say we've been helping them put those kinds of things in place. I don't know that it's very common at with medical device companies of all sizes and kinds, right? I think, but yes, I think we have seen the starts of that, and we're helping companies, but I don't know that it's universal. I think there are a lot of things where, frankly, the larger the company, the more there are other considerations where the legal framework, for example, is still being developed within, a very large company, and it may take a while to to sort of jump through the legal hoops for using a particular type of tool, or particular around IP and other things like that. And maybe there's an inclination to say no first, rather than because of those large corporate kind of issues. But that's changing as well, right? It is one of those things where you can't ignore it. It is not a you can't just sort of hide your head in the ground and say, well, we don't have to deal with this. It's so powerful that you have to.
You've actually, Bernard, almost answered the next question I was going to ask, which was from the audience, which is somebody asked, by the way, we're almost at the top of the hour. I think we've covered the core stuff. We're happy to keep fielding questions from the audience for a while more, and we're also happy to do follow-ups. There's no way we're going to peel this entire onion today. And it'll be, as we discussed, it'll be a new onion in 5 minutes. So what is the risk?
AI-generated onions.
What is the risk versus reward cost benefit of implementing automated AI tools for medical device software development? Are the efficiencies, quality of the output worth the more extensive validation efforts? And I think, Bernhard, what I heard you say is, well, today, maybe not, but if you had to place a bet on, do you need to be getting your ducks in a row because it will get there and the ROI will get there, it'd be, in your opinion, be a pretty bad bet to bet, well, I don't have to do this now because it's not going to get there. Or when it does, I'll just jump on the bandwagon. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, look, the question I'd have, right, is how important is efficiency in your SDLC in the first place? How much are you looking at optimizing that? How valuable is that for you? If you are in the business where software that you are building is really, really important, and the ability to move fast in building that out, you're building a digital ecosystem that supports your medical device and allows you to do a lot more with that and create more value, create better outcomes, and then you can potentially do this for more and more medical devices within your portfolio. That is pretty powerful. Then you can say the next question is, how important is it to be really efficient and to do that? So then what are your tools for efficiency? Better, more streamlined processes, automation of those things, and then AI as a piece of that. So the question is sort of, where are you? If the answer is, we got none of that and we're just doing some AI stuff, that's probably not your lowest hanging fruit. So I think be honest about how important is efficiency in your SDLC, in your product development lifecycle, and how much and what is the lowest hanging fruit to get to greater efficiency. It may or may not be an AI tool. For us, it is. We have a really efficient SDLC. We are already highly automated. We're already getting, through those things much, much faster. Development, better, fewer issues, less rework, etc. AI just adds on top of that. But it's not the first place I would go with some of that.
You're sort of like what I think you all have described as you sort of building blocks. You have a risk management building block. You have a sort of maturity building block as an organization of your sort of engineering quality approach. And then you decide about the scaffolding you build on top of that. But you probably don't want to run to the most sophisticated AI if your code development process is garbage in the first place.
Right. Yes. Garbage in, garbage out, etc.
Oh yeah,
is still the case.
Oh, this
right?
is even better because for AI, garbage feeds itself. It can feed
right,
itself.
Exactly.
Now, I was just reading that actually somebody's very concerned that Wikipedia has been trained on the indigenous language of Greenland, which has 50,000 speakers. The AI is being trained on Wikipedia articles, but the vast majority of Wikipedia articles in that language are auto-translated from other languages and are bad translations. So like we've now completely globalized a bad use of that language.
Look, I think we're going to get to the point. I think it's an interesting point where at some point, right, what's the best tool you have to validate the AI? Another AI tool, right? To, if you want to do adversarial work on your model, AI is probably really good at finding those nooks and crannies.
I like this one
when
here.
you wanted to be critical about the other AI, I think they will be particularly critical about the other AI. So
well, you have to be sneaky. You need to feed the output of one as an input of the other one and get it to judge. And then you get all different voices and you see where they kind of the consensus goes. But like this is kind of like going like model against each other to see which one does a certain type of task better. But I know we're getting a bit late, but I'd like to go for a few minutes back to the kind of the question that a lot of people had. Okay, how do we validate it? How do you keep it validated when it changes? What is the effect if you have put a human in the loop? And the question about the reward cost. So as a quality engineer, my opinion is that like cloud tools, you can completely validate AI. Cloud tools, somebody else manages the service for you and you may not know something about it. AI, not even that, not even them know exactly what's going on behind it. So use it for things that, and this would be if I have to advise a team, use it for things where you have somebody who can judge the output. Because then you can have somebody who can say, okay, this output makes sense, and use it to support the process. Yes, you can, without saying, okay, it's just AI who checks my job, but I want to create a first initial round of risk of requirements. And then I go through that, yeah, makes sense. No, it doesn't make sense. And then I see if I miss something based on an idea that I have. But if you go blind, if you step blind in an AI, you ask a question and you have no idea, zero idea of how to judge the results, this is going to be very difficult and even going to be difficult to validate. Because in order to validate it, you need to find the right answer, but you're asking that tool to give you the right answer. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing. So use it appropriately, use it based on the risk, use it for what software is designed for, to do things faster, to do things better. Autonomously, we are not there yet, at least not in this sector. Okay, so fine to do it faster, fine to do it better, to clean up checks, improve, embellish, prettify. Autonomously, we are not there yet. I will still put a human in there to have at least an idea of to judge the content. Don't use, even for like the tools like product, I don't think there is any medical device where the AI just makes the final call and goes for it. It's always a decision support tool. there is always the position, always the manual, like a manual or a person judging the content and making the final decision.
I'd say most of the time for the higher risk things, but we have AI algorithms where basically that is the diagnostic, right? You know, for infectious diseases and things like that, AI algorithms are part of the device there, and it is not, you know, human in the loop in that particular case. But we have, you know, those are also locked models right now. They are not continuously evolving models, and there are mechanisms such as PCCP where you can potentially continuously evolve those things, but no one's done that yet, right? So I think in general, you are correct. It's a question of sort of right now for what we're doing, there's very little that we can do that is fully autonomous. I think there are a few areas, but most of it is not as autonomous, and then less and less as you have higher risks and fewer safeguards built into your process, right?
So I think we're probably at a pretty good time to wrap up here. We're coming up on 70 minutes. So let me ask you each, we'll go through key takeaways. Could you give everybody 1 or 2 definite do's and 1 or 2 definite don'ts? Same side of the same coin, but let's do that. I'll start with Marion. In summary, if people have to take away just a couple of points, what's top of your list?
I think I would start with reading a little bit of guidance documents. For sure, I would recommend 42001 and GAN5 for understanding how to select an AI tool for development and how to assess if it's good enough for you. So think about you know, transparency, traceability, controllability, things like that, and make sure that your data does not accidentally leak into the training data of the model if you have not decided to do that. And start small. Start with a sandbox, test it out to see if it fits for your intended purpose, and don't scale it right away. So don't start with a big bang.
Okay. Matteo?
Okay, do your homeworks. Don't assess if you really need to use an AI to do a certain type of task. Decide which one to use based on risk on certain assessments, and understand what AI act or not. Understand what the boundaries and the appropriate use of this object of this tool is. Don't just use it because everybody else is doing it.
All right. Bernard?
I would say, you know, be realistic in your understanding of your process maturity, and whether you have appropriate metrics around your processes, and then evaluate the AI in that context, right? Is it the lowest hanging fruit? Do you have other things you could do that can move the needle on your metrics? Because that's what you're trying to do ultimately. You're using this for greater productivity, you know, fewer errors, issues, etc. Is that, you know, is that the highest and best thing to do? Are you mature enough to be able to do to be able to do that, or for that to make a difference? And then have good checklists and processes for evaluating tools, etc. Not just from a patient risk perspective, but also from a privacy, intellectual property perspective as well. That's the other, you know, those are the other important things as you're evaluating any vendor or any tooling, and certainly AI tooling as well. And then the last one I'd have is, you know, stay tuned. This stuff is moving very, very quickly, right? We're seeing in general technology acceleration. This is the next level of technology acceleration, and I expect us to things to look very different 3 years from now, 5 years from now, etc. And the question is, how can you take advantage of that as we move along? and you know, to do what you're trying to do more effectively, better, faster, cheaper, without breaking anything.
Excellent. I'll throw on a couple of my own here. Do dive in and assume you have to start dealing with these technologies. They're not going to go away. And even if they're not there today, they will be there soon. And if you wait till then, you'll be so far behind in the learning curve, you're going to be in trouble. Do remember that in medtech, we have a long history of taking new technologies of all kinds and incorporating them into medical devices and figuring out how to understand the unique risk properties of those things. You know, and that could be anything from a materials coding to the use of electricity to, you know, to the use of a computer. And remember, we have a track record for doing this, so we can apply these principles and think creatively the way we've done in the past. And the last one would be, don't assume that any other industry or any tech company is going to come to your rescue here, solving the problems we may think about it. There may be solutions. It may be that the people addressing how do we implement AI in hospitals are going to address these, you know, some of these issues, and we'll be able to learn from them. But the bottom line is, because we're regulated in a unique way, the only other people we can look to who we know have to do things the way we do it are other people in aerospace or, you know, or automotive or nuclear power or, you know, national security kind of systems. Other than that, I wouldn't bank on anybody else coming to our rescue as we move forward.
We also have a track record of implementing all this technology way later than everybody else.
That's true. And that's something that we are working on, trying to sort of like, we're never going to be like first on some of these things, but I think we're, you know, part of what we need to do is actually think about, you know, how do we safely move faster in terms of technology adoption? Because it's, you know, as I said, technology adoption and technology proliferation is accelerating. We want, how do we change the paradigms and mechanisms? How do we change how quickly we can get new standards out there? For example, that is not exactly the most efficient process right now.
Right.
And knowing that the auditors will ask about that very soon.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
and
right.
Their game will be up to like everybody else's. So it's easy to move fast and break things. In our case, we don't do it because we break human beings. You know, with connected devices, we could break people at scale. What's hard, and I think the exciting challenge of our industry, is how do we move faster and break nothing? So with that, we will close. Thank you all for joining us today. And please do follow up with thoughts, questions, topics for follow-on webinars. I don't think we've peeled the entire onion here. And like we said, there are 6 new versions of the onion in the last 60 minutes. So we will... Before
we leave, Randy, you promised a song.
Oh, right. Okay.
Okay.
You asked for it. Okay. Just remember that, 'cause it's bad. Actually, I have to say, it's interesting to watch.
I'm gonna miss the song. I have to go catch a plane. So
I will say, actually,
thanks everyone.
Thanks.
So
The songs, actually, I've watched, because we've been doing this for a year, and the application we use to generate these songs has actually gotten significantly more powerful over time. So it's just been interesting to kind of watch the evolution in 1 year of this. That said, I don't know that the songs have gotten any better. You can be the judge. This is the surf rock tune about SaMD development and the use of AI tooling. My apologies to anybody who believes that music is an art. We'll go back to it now.
with pride. Move faster and break nothing, yeah, that's the rule. AI-enabled software makes it all so cool. SoftComply in the mix, the ultimate tool.
All right, I don't think I can even take more of this song than that.
The
Very
music
cool.
was catchy, like I have
Mhm.
to say.
We will be releasing the Christmas album of works.
Yeah, as we discussed, we are ready for Eurovision.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you to our guests, Marion and Matteo, for joining us as well. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Have a nice day.
So